Hey everyone, live Doppler 13 meteorologist Sean Ash here in the Channel 13 Storm Center, and we appreciate you logging on here for 13 Weather Academy. And today we are going to be talking about hurricanes, and hurricane season begins on the 1st of June and it lasts until the end of November. That does not mean, however, that we can't have hurricanes prior to or after those dates. Hurricanes, boy, they love warm ocean water, and that's where we're going to begin our lesson today and where they typically impact the U.S. most, and that's from the tropical basin. Let me show you how this plays out in the Atlantic Ocean. As we heat up water, it takes longer to heat up water, takes longer to cool it down. So that's why between June 1st and November 30th, that's when we'll start to see these storms form. And when they form out here, they can start to spin, and when they spin, they can sometimes become hurricanes, okay? How do we know what's going on way out in the Atlantic Ocean away from the U.S. mainland? Well, thankfully, we have tropical satellite imagery, and we can see storms that are building, or sometimes we can see quiet weather patterns as well. We watch the Gulf of Mexico closely, and we watch down in the Caribbean where the water temperatures can get well above 80 degrees, and that is like high octane fuel for an Indy car. So the warmer the water, the more energy these storms can get. And these storms, believe it or not, will come off the coast of Africa. They're called waves. Not waves like literal on the ocean surface, but waves in the atmosphere. And these clusters of storms, as they reach the warm water of the Atlantic, again, sometimes they will begin to rotate. And unlike a tornado, a hurricane is much, much wider. And we will slice the hurricane in half and show you how it looks. So the center of the hurricane is what's known as the eye. Around the eye, towering thunderstorms that will develop on this warm ocean water. And they will start to flow to the north. And these storms will be building and bubbling around the eye of this hurricane here. Now at the surface, it's low pressure. And that means the wind is going in a counterclockwise direction. But aloft, the air is actually sinking. And when we have sinking air, that doesn't allow clouds to form. And that's why sometimes, if you were in the eye of the hurricane, you can look up and see blue sky during the day. Okay? But right on the edge of that eye, that's where we get into the intense thunderstorms. And this is what it looks like from a different perspective. So again, these are these towering storms that will build around the eye of the hurricane here. And that circulation at the surface is going counterclockwise, and it's going into the center of the eye. Aloft, the wind is actually blowing out away from the eye, and the resulting flow looks like this. Okay, so this is more of a three-dimensional here of the storm towers around the eye. Now the eye is the most intense part of the hurricane. However, even some of these smaller bands of thunderstorms that may be 60, 70, sometimes over 100 miles away from the eye, they will put down some pretty good gust as well. But it's right around the center. Those thunderstorms right there around the center of the eye, or the eye wall, where we get the most intense thunderstorm winds from the hurricane here. This is what Hurricane Dorian looked like on its approach to Marsh Harbor. This was back in 2019. It produced wind speeds of 185 miles per hour, close to some of the strongest wind ever from an Atlantic Basin hurricane. That was Hurricane Allen back in 1980. The wind is one part of the hurricane, and that's how we rate them on a category scale from 1 to 5. Now, when a storm gets wind speeds of 39 miles per hour, it gets a name. When it gets 74 miles per hour, that's when it becomes a hurricane. It goes from Category 1 to Category 5. And when we get into Category 5 wind, it's over 156 miles per hour. And that can be catastrophic from a damage standpoint. The wind is just one issue with a hurricane. The other issue is storm surge. Again, the wind flowing into the center of the eye causes upwelling of the water, and it creates something called storm surge. Now, in a weaker storm, the surge may not get too far inland. As the storm gets stronger, it starts to push the water a little bit more inland, and that surge can then cause destruction. It starts interacting with homes that may be next to the shoreline, or even hotels. And in the major hurricanes, that wall of water, that surge can get up to 20 feet and can get inland some 30 miles sometimes or more. And that, again, you take the wind, which can knock stuff down, but then water is very, very destructive, and that's what can cause some significant damage. And when we start talking about damage, we start talking about dollar figures. These are some of the costliest hurricanes to impact the U.S. here. Katrina back in 2005, nearly $130 billion in damage. Hurricane Harvey in 2017, which was a Category 4 storm, $125 billion as well. So very costly from wind and flooding and a combination of both. These are some of the historical hurricanes that have impacted the U.S. coastline here, at least from the Atlantic side. Some names that actually will get retired. That's what happens with hurricanes. If they cause enough damage, they get retired. Hurricane Andrew, 1992, was a Category 5 hurricane. There's Irma from 2017. 2 years ago, Michael came on shore, intensified rapidly, and it was a Category 5 hurricane. Okay, these are some of the ones that have impacted the Northwest Gulf, and just recently Laura in 2020, making landfall as a Category 4. Now, Katrina technically a 3, but we had a lot of flooding with Katrina around the New Orleans area. Harvey, Category 4, did a lot of wind damage, but a lot of flooding too, because the tropical systems, they can produce flooding rain rates here. Now, as we get along the Carolina coast, Fran from 96, there's also Hurricane Hugo from 1989. Then when you go farther up the northeastern coast, a major hurricane is rare in this part of the United States, because a lot of times they curve out to sea before they hit the northeast. And as you get farther away from the equator, the water up here typically is cooler. So you have to go back to 1985 with Hurricane Gloria for a major hurricane. That does not mean we didn't have a big one with Sandy, and that was caused a lot of flooding as well and a lot of wind damage. These are some of what can happen. These are state rainfall records from tropical systems. Even in Indiana, we can get very heavy rain from systems from the Gulf of Mexico or even from the Atlantic. So Audrey back in 1957 produced over 8 inches of rain with just one system. And Hurricane Ike a few years back produced wind damage. So they can get pretty far inland and cause damage. And so here's some of the other rain records. Over 30 inches of rain in North Carolina from Florence. You see Danny impacting Alabama, 45 inches from Easy back in 1950 in the state of Florida. And you may remember the scenes from Harvey, over 60 inches of rain around the Houston area with Harvey. That was back in 2017. So these systems have a lot of moisture with them. The activity for hurricanes will peak around September 10th. That's in terms of named storms and hurricanes. And then after that, that's usually the climatological peak. But we can still get some rather strong storms in October. And as I mentioned, we can actually have storms forming past November. Just depends on the conditions that are happening. These are the names, and the National Hurricane Center, they have a 6-year running list of names. And this is where we are for 2020. You really don't want to get toward the end of the list. That means it's been a busy season. Now, we talked about this is the Atlantic basin. But we also have a different naming system for hurricanes in the eastern Pacific. They have their own naming system there as well. And in the eastern Pacific, they are still what we call hurricanes, okay? And that season runs from May 15th to November 30th. Still the same premise, still need the warm water, okay? Typically don't get too far into the Carolina coast or California coast, because again, the farther north you go from the equator, the air starts to cool down. The Southwest Pacific, the same idea on how they're formed, but in this part of the world, they're known as cyclones. And there you go. That's Australia there. That runs from October to May. And then in the Northwest Pacific, these can happen any time of year, and sometimes these can be rather large. Some of the largest storms in the ocean across the world will happen in this part of the ocean, Northwest Pacific. These are called typhoons, and sometimes they can be super typhoons, and that's covered by the Typhoon Warning Center. And so we will watch these storms in the winter months. Sometimes they can change. The storms in the Northwest Pacific near the East Asia, sometimes they can actually impact our weather on this part of the globe here. And then last but certainly not least, because these can get rather large as well, in the North Indian Ocean from April to December, they can become some rather severe cyclonic storms over there in the Indian Ocean. So again, the main idea is that these storms need the warm ocean water, and a lot of people will ask me, hey, what's stronger, tornado or hurricane? A tornado can have higher wind, but in a smaller area, like a figure skater, whereas a hurricane, the wind field can be much, much larger and can impact many more people. We hope you enjoyed our presentation today on hurricanes, and please check back here at the 13 Weather Academy as we'll be providing some new classroom lessons in the months to come.